Welcome to African Folktales by Mozzie. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you are watching from at the comments section, then turn on your notification. Sit close and listen carefully, because this is not just a story. It is a warning passed down by elders who learned too late. They say that if the king had listened, the land would still be alive. Long ago, before sorrow touched the hills, there stood a proud kingdom called Aroko. It rested between a wide river and a deep forest older than memory. The people believed the spirits lived in all things, in the soil, in the water, and in the wind that moved through the trees at night. For many seasons, Aroko thrived. Crops grew tall, animals were plenty, and children laughed without fear. The spirits watched, and the land answered with peace. But peace does not last when pride grows louder than wisdom. King Daramola ruled from a high throne carved from sacred wood. He was brave, strong, and respected. He had defeated enemies and built walls so thick they seemed unbreakable. Yet the king trusted only what he could see and control. Power protects a kingdom, he often said. Not whispers. The elders warned him that listening was part of ruling. They spoke of balance and signs that must never be ignored. The king smiled and waved them away. Then small things began to change. The wind stopped singing at dusk. Fires flickered blue before dying. Children dreamed of shadows walking where trees once stood. The people noticed. The elders feared. The king dismissed it all. One evening, as the sun sank red into the earth, the forest went completely still. That was the night the spirits began to watch closely. The spirits of Aroko never began with anger. They always warned first. At dawn, farmers found their footprints pressed deep into the soil, as if the earth had softened overnight. Hunters followed familiar paths, only to become lost, though the forest had not changed. The river pulled gently away from its banks, leaving cracked mud behind. These are signs, the elders said. The spirits are uneasy. They gathered at the palace gates dressed in white cloth. Ayalode, the oldest among them, spoke with a trembling voice. "Great king, the land is speaking. We must listen." King Daramola sat tall on his throne. "The land does not speak," he replied. "It obeys." That same day, the palace horses refused to drink from the river. Birds circled the sky without landing. At night, the moon hid behind clouds though no rain fell. Fear moved quietly through the streets as people whispered to one another. The elders prepared the rite of listening, a sacred ritual meant to calm restless spirits. It had not been performed in many lifetimes. When they asked the king for permission, he refused. "Rituals weaken courage," he said. "We will not bow to shadows." That night, the king dreamed. He stood alone in the forest. The trees leaned inward, and a voice rose from the ground itself. "Honor the old ways, or lose what you rule." The king woke in sweat, his heart pounding. For a moment, fear touched him. Then pride returned. "It was only a dream," he said. Deep beneath the forest roots, something ancient shifted. On the seventh day of silence, a stranger appeared at the palace gates. He wore no crown, no armor, and no shoes. His clothes were plain, yet untouched by dust. When he walked, his feet made no sound against the stone. "I bring a message," he told the guards. Before they could stop him, the palace doors opened on their own. The stranger stood before the throne and bowed slightly. "The spirits offer the king a choice," he said calmly. "Respect the land, and Aroko will heal. Ignore it, and the kingdom will fall." The court fell silent. King Daramola rose slowly, anger flashing in his eyes. "Who sent you?" he demanded. "The land," the stranger replied. The king laughed sharply. "Enough of this foolishness, guards." As the guards reached for him, the stranger faded like smoke in the air. No scream, no trace. Fear filled the room. That night, the king called his council. His voice was firm and final. "The forest gives enemies cover," he declared. "We will cut it down and build stronger walls. No spirits will protect us. Only strength will," the elders cried out. Mothers knelt with children in their arms. The king signed the order. Axes were sharpened before dawn. Deep in the forest, the spirits gathered. Their patience thinned. Their voices faded into silence. The first tree fell at sunrise. As its trunk hit the ground, the earth shook slightly, as if in pain. Dark sap spilled like tears. The men paused but continued. By midday, the sky dimmed. Birds fled without sound. The air grew heavy and hard to breathe. That night, screams echoed from the forest. No one could say what made them. The river turned cloudy the next morning. Fish floated lifeless on the surface. Crops near the forest edge wilted overnight. Still, the king ordered the cutting to continue. "Fear is spreading lies," he said. Children fell ill without cause. Fires refused to light. Shadows lingered where light should have been. Ayalode returned to the palace one final time. "Stop this," she begged. "The spirits are withdrawing their protection." King Daramola turned away. When the last sacred tree fell, a deep rumble rolled through the land. The wind rose suddenly, cold and sharp. Dark clouds gathered above the palace. The spirits had turned their backs. Now the kingdom would stand alone. The storm came without rain. Thunder cracked the sky, while lightning revealed new cracks in the palace walls. The wind screamed through empty streets. That night, the sacred stone in the palace yard split in two. The people knew then that the spirits had gone. King Daramola stood at his window, watching fear spread through the kingdom. For the first time, doubt entered his heart. But regret comes slower than disaster. Beyond the forest, something ancient awakened. And Aroko's true suffering was about to begin. The spirits did not strike all at once. They withdrew slowly, letting the people feel the absence of protection. Within days, the harvest failed. Grain turned brittle in storage. Fruit rotted before ripening. Hunger began to walk the roads of Aroko like an unwelcome visitor who knew every door. Mothers stretched meals thin. Fathers searched farther for food and returned with nothing. The river shrank again, exposing stones shaped like warning marks. Wells tasted bitter. The king ordered food taken from the palace stores, but even there, supplies spoiled overnight. Rats fled the city, sensing what humans could not yet see. The elders gathered in secret, whispering that the spirits had sealed the land. "This is not punishment," Ayalode said. "This is consequence." King Daramola sent soldiers to nearby lands to demand aid, but neighboring rulers refused. "Your land is cursed," they said. "We will not invite it into ours." That night, the king dreamed again. He stood before an empty throne while shadows wore his crown. He woke shouting, his hands shaking. Still, pride held him upright. "We endure," he told the people. "This will pass, but suffering does not pass when it is ignored. It settles in." And in the quiet hunger of the villages, something else began to stir. Someone small, unnoticed, and listening. Her name was Amara, and she was no one important. She lived near the forest edge with her grandmother and fetched water each morning before the sun rose. While others heard only silence, Amara heard whispers in the wind. Soft voices called her name. They spoke in feelings, not words. One morning, as she filled her pot, the river shivered. "Tell them," the voice urged. Amara ran to the elders, trembling. "The spirits are still here," she said. "They are hurt. They are waiting." Some elders listened. Others feared hope. Ayalode looked into the child's eyes and saw truth. "The spirits speak through her," she said. When the king heard of Amara, he dismissed her as a frightened child. "Fear invents voices," he said. But that night, Amara dreamed of the forest bleeding light and shadows chasing the palace walls. She woke screaming. The spirits were not silent after all. They had chosen a voice the king would never respect. As suffering deepened, King Daramola tightened his rule. He blamed the elders for spreading fear and banned gatherings. Drums were silenced. Stories forbidden. Soldiers patrolled the streets. When Amara was brought before him, she stood small but unafraid. "The spirits want you to listen," she said. The court laughed. The king's face hardened. "Enough," he said. "Take her away." Ayalode stepped forward. "Harm the child, and the land will answer." The king hesitated, then turned cold. "The land already has," he replied. Amara was released, but the warning was clear. That night, the palace walls cracked again. Statues fell. Fear seeped into even the strongest hearts. Still, the king would not bend. Pride had wrapped itself too tightly around his crown. The forest burned without fire. Trees blackened overnight. Ash fell like snow. The people cried out. Amara collapsed, overwhelmed by voices. "The spirits demand balance," she whispered. "The forest must be honored. The king must bow." The elders carried the message to the palace. For the first time, the king listened insolently. He stared at his crown, suddenly heavy. Outside, thunder rolled. The spirits waited. At dawn, the kingdom held its breath. King Daramola stood before the people. He could still choose humility. He could still save Aroko. The wind stirred, waiting for his words. The child watched. The elders prayed. And the spirits leaned close. What the king said next would decide everything. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The crowd stood silent as King Daramola stepped forward. The wind brushed his robes like a final question. The elders watched him closely. Amra's hands trembled at her sides. For a long moment, the king said nothing. Then he lifted his chin. Aroko will not bow to fear, he declared. No spirits will command a king. A low cry spread through the people. The wind died instantly. The air grew heavy, pressing against every chest. Amara fell to her knees, clutching her head. They are leaving, she whispered. The elders dropped their staffs in sorrow. Above the palace, clouds twisted into dark shapes and thunder cracked like breaking stone. King Daramola felt the weight of his words settle like chains, but still he stood firm. We stand by strength alone, he said. The spirits heard him. And they answered not with words, but with absence. The river dried within hours. Cracks split the earth across the fields. Wells collapsed inward. Crops crumbled into dust at a touch. Panic spread through Aroko like fire. People ran through the streets, calling out names, searching for hope. The palace guards abandoned their posts, fear stronger than loyalty. Inside the throne room, candles refused to stay lit. King Daramola sat alone, surrounded by silence. For the first time, his power meant nothing. Outside the city walls, the forest retreated. Trees withered. Paths vanished. The land itself no longer recognized Aroko. The spirits had not destroyed the kingdom. They had simply stepped away. And without them, the land could not survive. By the third day, the palace began to sink. Stones cracked and slid apart as if the earth rejected them. Statues shattered. Towers leaned. King Daramola ran through empty halls, calling for guards who no longer answered. Memories echoed louder than footsteps. He reached the sacred throne and saw it split down the middle, the old wood dull and lifeless. Outside, the people fled toward the hills. Amara helped the elders, her voice guiding them through collapsing streets. The palace groaned one final time before falling inward, swallowed by dust. The crown rolled across the floor and disappeared beneath stone. King Daramola escaped into the wilderness alone. His robes were torn. His crown was gone. For days, he wandered through dry land where nothing answered his calls. Hunger weakened him. Silence followed him. At night, dreams haunted him, visions of what might have been. He fell to his knees beneath a dead tree and wept. I should have listened, he whispered. The wind did not respond. Regret had arrived, but the spirits no longer waited. Amara stood with the survivors beyond the hills. The spirits spoke softly to her once more. The land may heal, they said, but the old kingdom is finished. The elders bowed their heads. Aroko was gone, but memory remained. And stories, once spoken, never truly die. The land of Aroko was silent, but it was not gone. Rivers had shrunk, and the soil was cracked, but life stirred cautiously in hidden places. Small green shoots pushed through dust. Animals that had fled the city returned slowly, hesitant, as if testing the air. The survivors gathered beyond the hills, guided by Amara and the elders. The spirits are listening, Ayalode said. They watch. They wait for balance. Amara knelt by a small spring, placing her hand in the water. The voices of the spirits whispered to her, soft but clear. Care for the land, teach the people, honor what is old. The child's eyes shone with understanding. Over the next days, the survivors learned to plant carefully, to build small shelters, and to respect the forest again. Every action mattered. The king's pride had destroyed much, but the land had memory. It remembered which hands were gentle. Slowly, hope began to grow alongside the new shoots. But the memory of the palace, of its towers and broken stone, was like a shadow over the hills. Amara understood that the lesson of King Daramola would echo for generations, even as the land healed. The story had to be told. Power alone cannot command nature. And the voices ignored today may become the silence that destroys tomorrow. Amara, though still a child, became the guide for those who survived. Each day she walked the forest edge, listening to whispers no one else could hear. The spirits taught her the names of trees, the songs of rivers, and the hidden paths where life endured. She learned that water remembers the first hands that touched it, that wind can carry warning or hope, and that the forest protects those who honor it. Villagers came to her with questions, with fears, with doubts, and she spoke what the spirits had taught her. Respect the land, and it will sustain you. Ignore it, and sorrow will follow, she said. The people began planting carefully, leaving spaces for wildflowers and for the forest to breathe. They rebuilt simple homes, never exceeding what the land could provide. Word of Amara's wisdom spread. Travelers came, some skeptical, some curious, yet all left with a renewed reverence for the spirits of Aroko. Even the wind seemed lighter when she spoke, carrying seeds across dry fields, promising renewal if humans acted with care from the hills and valleys. Travelers carried stories of Aroko's fall and the child who could hear the spirits. Bards sang of King Daramola's pride and the forest's patience. Parents warned children with whispers, if you do not listen, the land will speak in silence. Even neighboring kingdoms felt the tale ripple through their lands. Crops that had once been abundant were harvested with care. Streams were cleaned and honored. Villagers planted flowers for the spirits, leaving small offerings at stones and riversides. Children played under the watchful trees, learning that every choice shaped their world. The spirits spoke less loudly now, but their presence was undeniable. Every rustle of leaves and every ripple in water reminded the people that balance could be restored if respected. And in every whispered story, the memory of the king's mistake lived on, a caution that pride without listening brings destruction. Seasons passed. The cracked soil softened. Streams ran clear again. Small animals returned, hopping across rocks and burrows. Forests regrew slowly, not as tall as before, but patient. The survivors, guided by Amara, learned new songs of the land. Festivals of planting and harvest were held, but always with humility. The spirits watched, approving, and sometimes whispering to guide hands that needed correction. Children grew learning to respect what they could not see, to listen to the quiet signs. The kingdom was different now. It was smaller, but wiser. Memories of the old palace and its destruction were preserved in stories and songs. Amara's voice, clear and calm, reminded everyone that power without listening is empty. Life returned to the land, not fully restored, but steady, cautious, alive. Amara grew under the tutelage of the spirits and elders. Every evening, she told stories around firelight. She told of the river that receded, the forest that screamed, and the king who could not hear. People listened, rapt, and the story became more than memory, it became warning. Even as Aroko healed, travelers carried the story to distant lands. If only the king had listened, they whispered. And it was true, the lessons of pride, of disrespect, and of listening to what cannot always be seen traveled farther than armies ever could. Children learned from Amara, and elders taught patience. The spirits, though no longer visible, were never gone. Every leaf, every stone, every river reflected their presence. Aroko's heartbeat returned, quiet and steady. And the story of the king's mistake lived on in every word Amara spoke, ensuring no one would forget what pride and silence could destroy. Years passed, and Amara grew taller, wiser, and stronger in spirit. The survivors looked to her not only for guidance, but for hope. She learned to speak the language of the wind, the river, and the trees. Every day, she walked the forest, touching roots, listening to water, and feeling the heartbeat of the land beneath her feet. Children followed her, curious and attentive, learning that every movement left a mark on the earth. If you plant carelessly, the land remembers, she would say. If you waste, the spirits watch. Villagers rebuilt their homes carefully, ensuring nothing was taken more than needed. Festivals honored the rivers, the forests, and the stones. Amara reminded everyone that the spirits were never far, they were patient teachers, waiting for hearts to open. King Daramola, now wandering in exile, heard rumors of her wisdom and the rebirth of Aroko. Pride weighed heavily on him. He realized, too late, that strength without respect is empty. Meanwhile, Amara became the voice of generations, her knowledge stretching beyond survival into lessons of patience, humility, and listening. Aroko's land began to recover more fully each season. Crops flourished where children had planted flowers for the spirits. Streams ran clean, carrying life instead of warning. Animals returned to their natural paths, and forests expanded slowly, green and watchful. Elders trained the young to read signs, to notice small changes in nature, and to honor every tree, stone, and river. Stories of King Daramola's fall were told at every firelight. Pride blinds, listening heals, Amara said. Travelers from distant lands arrived, witnessing Aroko's careful recovery. They marveled at the humility and respect that shaped every action. Even the river seemed to remember the people's efforts, flowing steadily, bringing fish and water to the fields. Aroko was smaller than before, yet stronger in wisdom and spirit. The land had been scarred, but it now had guardians who would not forget the lessons of pride, arrogance, and neglect. The spirits, once withdrawn, began to return. At first, it was subtle a breeze that carried seeds to barren soil, a soft glow in the trees at dawn, the laughter of animals where there had been silence. Amara understood their presence fully, feeling their guidance in every step she took. Villagers sensed it too, though not as clearly as she did. Crops grew taller, forests thickened, and rivers swelled gently. Even King Daramola, wandering far from Aroko, felt the pull of the spirits calling him toward humility. The land itself whispered, respect must guide every choice. Festivals celebrated the return of balance, with offerings to the spirits for their patience. Amara reminded all, the spirits do not reward recklessness. They honor care, listening, and courage to act rightly. The kingdom was reborn, not as it once was, but wiser, tempered by loss and guided by the voices of those who had learned to listen. Amara grew into a wise leader, not with a crown, but with respect from every villager. She traveled through the villages, teaching children to observe, to care, and to honor the unseen. Every stone, river, and tree had a lesson. Power alone cannot protect, she reminded them. It is respect and listening that keeps life steady. Travelers carried stories of Aroko across mountains and rivers, telling how a kingdom fell because the king ignored the spirits, and how a child restored hope. The elders watched proudly, knowing that the land would never again suffer such neglect. King Daramola, now old and humbled, returned one day. Seeing the work of Amara, he knelt on the soil, understanding too late the cost of arrogance. Amara helped him rise, teaching that learning from mistakes, even too late, still matters. The land healed fully over the next seasons, yet it always remembered the consequences of pride. And so, the tale of Aroko was carried forever. Amara's name became legend, not for battles fought or walls built, but for listening when others could not. The spirits, patient and wise, watched over the kingdom, now protected by humility and care. Fires were lit at night, children played under the green canopy, and rivers sang with life once more. The elders whispered the final lesson: a kingdom thrives not through strength alone, but through respect, listening, and courage to act rightly. And when travelers tell the story across lands and seas, they remember, if only the king had listened, much suffering could have been avoided, but the voices of the land endure, teaching every generation that hears them. Aroko remained alive, its story etched in every stone, every leaf, every heartbeat of the land. And that story will never die.